My name is Bruce McConnell. I'm the Senior Vice President at EastWest, and it's really my pleasure to be here with all of you. This is the beginning of my 8th week on the job, so some of you know me from my previous incarnation, but it's really great to be here in this, wearing this hat. So we just heard remarks from one of the major cyber powers in the world. And we heard that we should try to work on the easy stuff first, which as soon as we figure out what the easy stuff is, we'll definitely get right on that. And let's work on hard stuff too at the same time. We also heard about the importance of the group of government experts and other use of the UN system. So lots of progress already being made in those areas. And in fact, that's what we hope to talk about this morning is cooperation, where we're making progress globally and where there's still gaps. So as I say, we just heard from one of the world's major cyber powers, and we have 4 other major cyber powers represented here: India, the United States, Germany, and Microsoft. Because, and of course, I'm here representing civil society. In cyberspace, as we all know, it takes a village. Many roles are to be played, and no one government, no one company, and no one sector of the economy can make cyberspace safe, secure, reliable, and open. That's why we're calling this summit is about cooperation in cyberspace, and why EastWest is repositioning our cyber program, as John Morose mentioned earlier, to engage on governance and development issues as well as on cyberspace security. So for our conversation this morning, we have a great panel here. You can read all about them in the list of participants, the bios. But going down the row here, to my immediate left, Ambassador Latha Reddy, the former Deputy National Security Advisor of India, and a powerful voice on cybersecurity and cyber's impact on culture, both in India and in the world. We're proud to have her also as a distinguished fellow at EastWest. Next to her is Christopher Painter, who is the U.S. State Department's coordinator for cyber issues. We have served together when he was at the White House and much earlier when he was prosecuting cyber criminals from the Justice Department. So welcome, Chris. Next to Chris is Ambassador Dirk Brengelmann, Chris's German counterpart, and Commissioner for International Cyber Policy, who has a long history and a distinguished career in security policy more broadly, and recently returned from Bali with the UN-sponsored Internet Governance Forum, which I'll be quizzing our panelists on in a little while. And at the end of the row, Scott Charney, who also served at the Justice Department and who is now a corporate vice president responsible for ensuring that all Microsoft products, services, and internal networks meet company standards for privacy and security. So I've asked our panel members to think about, before coming up here today, the main issues that impede cooperation today. And so we'll have some brief opening remarks from everyone, and then we'll just have a conversation with each other and with you until they give us the hook and drag us off the stage. It's my own sense that in many of the conversations that we have about cyberspace security, resilience, governance, development, these interlinking issues, the participants can tend to talk past each other. They're starting from different cultural and political assumptions and values, and those political assumptions and values are not always explicitly stated. And this causes misunderstanding. So one example is content posted on social media, which has the potential to incite violence inside a country. So nations and cultures have different political systems and ways that the state and citizens react to this kind of threat. It's very different across countries how people react to that kind of, both institutions and citizens react to that kind of information. However, one thing that we have in common is that most citizens still expect the state to maintain an appropriate degree of order in society, and so that's an area where there's some agreement, and that might be the basis for starting conversations in that area. Another example goes to feeling in the developing world that the Western domination of the internet, in their view, has outlived its usefulness. something that has been hard for some in the West to hear. Yet it will benefit the entire global economy if the developing world can take advantage of the opportunities innovation that cyberspace enables. So there are some contentious issues, to be sure, but there are also baseline areas of agreement that may be a starting point for progress. So let me now turn to the panelists and for some brief remarks, and we'll get the conversation going. Latha?
It's a pleasure to be here again. This is my third summit, EWI summit. But when I was speaking at London and last year at New Delhi, I was part of the government. And now I speak as someone who is out of government, but still perhaps a voice for India. And I'm also delighted to be part of the EWI family. Bruce, you asked me to comment on the global issues that have been raised and related to how we should and do cooperate in cyberspace, and then give the Indian twist on these issues. I'll try to give the Indian twist without turning it into a rope trick. And so let me start by saying when I looked at the subject and the necessity for cooperation in cyberspace, I saw two kinds of cooperation that we need. One is the cooperation that you need within countries themselves. You need coordination at times within governments because there are so many different government departments and organizations involved in the question of cyberspace. So you need that coordination. You also need the coordination of each government with its own private sector, with its own academia, with its own civil society. That's one kind of cooperation. The second kind of cooperation you need in cybersecurity or in cyberspace is between countries. And unfortunately, so far we haven't been really successful in creating a really comprehensive global institutional mechanism where countries can and do talk to each other. As Bruce pointed out, there may be differences on some major issues, but I do believe that there are some fundamental issues which perhaps the whole world could agree to take some action on. And I've just jotted down a few ideas that I had. Firstly, I don't think there's any country that would disagree with the fact that cybercrime is a real issue. We need to tackle cybercrime. We need to punish criminals who use cyberspace instead of traditional forms of crime. Secondly, I think the use of cyber for terrorism is something on which all countries should come together and should agree on some basic rules. The third, which I think the Minister Tsai also mentioned, which I think is very important, is to step up the cooperation between the CERTs or the computer emergency response teams of each country. It is happening to a certain extent. India too has a very active CERT called CERT-IN. And I know that they too have signed multiple agreements and are in touch with their counterparts in different countries for some real-time exchange of information. Without getting involved too much in the international agreements part of it, they have their own mechanism to cooperate. The other thing which I think we can easily cooperate on is exchange of best practices. And the last I would say is on training between our experts in different countries on, for instance, the training of police. You need to get your police sensitized to be able to register a complaint about cybercrime. Your law enforcement agencies, how do they investigate cybercrimes? And your legal community, how are you going to legislate on cyber issues in your courts? How are lawyers going to understand the issues when a crime is instigated in another country through the medium of cyberspace, but the victim is in a third country? It may even be routed through another country, so you actually have three legal systems to consider. Now turning to the Indian twist, I just wanted to say that we released a cybersecurity policy which is available on the website of the Department of Electronics and Information Technology, which we fondly call DEITY. I don't know whether this is delusions of grandeur, but that's what our department calls itself. The DEITY released this in August of 2013. And I just wanted to quote very briefly that while it is a national cybersecurity policy, it also specifically states as a key objective that India will enhance global cooperation by promoting shared understanding and leveraging relationships for furthering the cause of the security of cyberspace. It also states as a strategy that India will develop bilateral and multilateral relationships in the area of cybersecurity with other countries to enhance national and global cooperation among security agencies, the CERTs, even defense agencies and forces, and the law enforcement agencies and judicial systems. So similarly in India, as a sort of example of the other kind of cooperation, we set up a joint working group on cooperation between the government and the private sector or industry in India. And we released a report in October 2012, also available on the web, as to how private sector and government can actually cooperate. And my colleague Kamlesh Bajaj from the Data Security Corporation of India was very active on the private sector side, and we enjoyed working together on this, and it came out in record time, in 3 months, and we actually identified 4 pilot projects where the government and the private sector could work together, including setting up of a test lab, setting up of a center of excellence. Similarly, apart from our own bilateral, regional, multilateral engagements on cooperation in cybersecurity, I thought it would be of interest to this audience to know that the ICANN president recently visited India. And during his visit, a letter of intent was signed between ICANN and India's CDAC, which is actually a government agency, the Center for Development of Advanced Computing. And they signed a letter of intent to create a center of excellence in domain name system security in India. And the proposal will be jointly financed by ICANN and the CDAC. And there will be a state-of-art research laboratory to evaluate and test security solutions in India. But this is a case of clear collaboration across lines, where ICANN is not a government entity, CDAC is. There's an Indian and a US collaborative effort. On the multilateral front, as Minister Sai said, India does remain also active on the UNGGE, the UN government experts on information technology security, as well as the Joint Working Group on Enhanced Cooperation on Cybersecurity in the UN. I think we could talk more on these aspects maybe in the breakthrough session, which we're going to have on the diplomatic agenda for 2014. Where do we go? What have we achieved? And that can go on later this morning. But I think I'll stop here and give my fellow panelists a chance. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Latha. And on the point about exchanging best practices, as the minister mentioned, and John Morose also mentioned, we do have in your packets the executive summary of the harmful hacking report, which EastWest worked on with the Internet Society of China. In that full version of that report, which we're putting the final touches on and will be made available on our website in the days ahead, there are a list of, I think, 88 best practices that is a good basis for a lot of the anti-hacking work that we can all do together. So I appreciate your mentioning that.
Yeah.
Christopher?
Thanks, and it's good to be back here. I participated back in London, where I was at the White House at the time. We had just come out with the President's International Strategy for Cyberspace, which really talked about all these different buckets of issues, from freedom of expression online through to international security issues, with an overarching goal of attaining an open, interoperable, secure, and reliable information and communications infrastructure, really for the people and governments and civil society and the private sector throughout the world. And there's been a lot of progress since then. I want to talk a little bit about that, but also some of the challenges. I just came from the Seoul conference in cyberspace. It was held in Korea, which brought together over 80 different governments, very high-level representation from governments, from private sector and civil society, where I participated in an international security panel and had done this the year before in Budapest. And I think it's significant to see The progress that's been made in that area, in particular in the last year, not that there's not much more to do, but I think there's been some real significant progress. And then the IGF, which we'll talk about a little bit later, the Internet Governance Forum, which is a very good, important meeting of various stakeholders from around the world on a variety of Internet issues. A couple things I just wanted to comment on before I delve into some of the stuff that's happened and some of the challenges. There has been, I think, some progress just in the way we think about this issue. And by that, one of the things that our IEEE speaker mentioned, and by the way, I have an IEEE fellow in my office now, it's really important, and it's been an ongoing conversation, ongoing progress, in bringing the technical community and the policy community closer together. Policy experts don't need to be that deep in the technology to understand the larger implications, but they do have to have some grounding. And before, those two communities were often stovepipes. So bringing them together, and I think I've seen that over the last few years, and that's been good. The other is bringing the economic community and the security community together. And that, I think, happened most recently in the US over the issue of intrusions into computer systems and theft of intellectual property. I think that made it clear this was not just a security issue in cyberspace, but very much an economic issue. And the issues that we're dealing with more generally on the internet really go to economic prosperity and social growth. And then finally, I think there's been this move. My office at the State Department was created a little over 2 years ago now as the first one where we created an office in a foreign ministry to really look at this basket of issues from a foreign policy perspective. And that has grown around the world now. Dirk, my counterpart, who you'll be hearing from in a moment, is the most recent member of the club. But there's over, I think, about 12 to 15 different countries now have appointed someone in their foreign ministries to do that. And that's significant because, again, it's a policy issue that really is important as a foreign policy issue and a domestic policy issue, and not just as a technical issue. So those are all, I think, interesting developments. Now, in terms of some of the things that have happened over the course of the last year, Latha had mentioned, and I've dealt with her often when she was in her government role in India, and I'll mention that in a moment, the group of governmental experts in the UN. And that was a very significant development this year because they came out with a consensus report. And this was 15 countries. It included the United States, included the UK, included Germany, included China, included Russia, included India. So it had a very broad breadth of different kind of countries with different aspects of this. And they were able to reach a consensus, really significant consensus, around a few real key aspects that will frame our discussion, particularly in the international security area, for the next couple of years. One is the view that international law applies in cyberspace, just like it does in the physical world. So existing international law, including things like the UN Charter, the law of armed conflict, et cetera, applies in cyberspace. How it applies and exactly the application of international law is something we still need to work on and talk about. But the fact that existing law applies is significant, that you don't need to create a whole new legal structure, a whole new normative structure because cyberspace. Cyberspace is in some ways challenging and different, but in many ways it's the same as the physical world. And that was critically important. And that has implications in issues like proportionality and distinction and how civilian infrastructure is treated that are really far-reaching. And so I think that's very important. Another thing that was found in this report, and I commend this report to all of you if you haven't read it, is that states' efforts to address security of ICTs must go hand in hand with respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international instruments. And I'll circle back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and really what that means. There was also a conclusion that states shouldn't use proxy actors to do those things that states couldn't do themselves. And that's another significant finding, especially with respect to cyberspace and some of the anonymity it provides. And then there was a focus on two other things that I think are significant. One, capacity building, particularly for the developing world, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. And two, the idea of confidence building measures in cyberspace. This is an area where we've done quite a bit of work over the last few years, where you're trying to build better transparency and cooperation and ultimately stability between different states, states who may not see things the same way, who may be frenemies, if you will, who have some interests in common, but have others where there's a competitive environment, where you're essentially finding ways to build transparency, build cooperation, and therefore reduce the chance of misperception, miscalculation, and possible escalation in cyberspace, which would harm everyone. No one wants a cyberspace that is a source of constant conflict. So having those confidence-building measures is critically important, and that was enshrined in this GG report, and it talked about some of the particular ones you could do. And these are not rocket science, but we have done this year. This is another landmark thing that happened this year. In the context of our bilateral relationship with the Russian Federation, Russia and the US agreed to the first ever confidence-building measures in cyberspace. And this was announced by President Obama and Putin at the G8 summit this year. And these included exchanging military doctrine, having a hotline in the White House and the Kremlin to deal with cyber incidents, using something called the Nuclear Risk Reduction Center, which, as the name implies, was originally involved as the original hotline that was used between the US and Russia. And now it's being used for other purposes too, including climate change, but now we're using it for cyber. And increased indicator exchanges between US CERT, our Computer Emergency Response Team, and the Russian Federation. So all those are now in the works, and the creation of a working group between the US and Russia. So that is important. We're also looking at the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, to do more multilateral confidence-building measures, and ARF and other places. So that's all, I think, very significant. You heard both the minister mention and Bruce and others have mentioned the creation of this working group with China, and I'm privileged to chair that working group that just started its work this year. We've had one meeting. We're going to have another meeting this year. That is critically important in a way to build better understanding and exchange views, and it is based both on, it provides both a forum to raise real concerns, including concerns that you've heard President Obama articulate about the theft of intellectual property online, and to benefit the commercial sectors of countries. That's something that's been a huge concern. It's raised in the State of the Union address, was raised by former National Security Advisor Tom Donilon. It provides a forum to raise those concerns and to work through those. But it also provides a forum to try to come up with ways that we can cooperate together. And the first meeting that we had, I thought, was very constructive. It focused on some of those constructive things that we might be able to work on together to build better transparency and cooperation. And when I think about this, the larger subject of these cooperative measures, transparency is easy. You know, it sounds easy, but it's not necessarily easy. It's points of contact. It's making sure you know who your counterparts are. You have communication channels. That's something we're very much interested in working with China on. I was pleased to hear the minister mention that as his third point. And we want to move that forward, as we have done with Russia and with other countries in the world. But it also could be cooperating against third-party threats, against botnets. And obviously, Scott has a bunch to talk about from some of the past where it's been done on botnets. But one of the things we've done this year is our financial institutions have been subject to denial of service attacks fairly constantly over this last year. And we've reached out to countries around the world, over 100 of them, through our CERT team, but also through diplomatic channels, trying to build a norm of better cooperation. And that's been, I think, a key thing. And so there's a lot of work to do in that working group. I look forward to that, and I think that's important. There's been the UN Human Rights Commission Council who came out with a resolution that you have the same rights online as you do offline. And that's also a critically important step in terms of recognition of existing law in place. So there's been a lot of very good activity, and there's been a lot of attention on capacity building, which, as Latha said, is really a key thing to build these infrastructures, to work with the developing world, to make them part of this conversation, and to have them have the capabilities, whether it be cybercrime, CERTs, or even just national policies and national strategies to deal with this. So that's all important. Now, on the other hand, there continue to be challenges. Theft of intellectual property still is a challenge. Internet governance and internet freedom issues, I think in some ways these come together because there is, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is universal. These are universal rights. These are not rights that are subject to the sovereignty of particular countries. You can't draw a border around your country and say that you don't have these universal rights. So there's a difference between public order and what kinds of things states should be very narrowly prescribing, and really worried about information security issues where it's focusing on people exercising their universal right of expression. So that's an issue. And that ties in with some of the internet governance debate, which there are countries in the world who do not really accept the multi-stakeholder system of governance, which is civil society, the private sector, and governments all together, not one calling the shots, really governing the internet and the technical nature of the internet, which has led to its great success, frankly, and is really, if we didn't have that, if governments had controlled it from the beginning, you never have the platform you have now. But they want a much more state-controlled system, which we think is essentially going to be bad for innovation, bad for social growth, and also goes to the content issue again. It's a way to control content, to control what's seen as destabilizing speech. And so those issues, I think, to come together. And then finally, in terms of cybercrime, there has been a lot of progress made. The Budapest Convention on Cybercrime has more and more countries are joining it or emulating it in terms of its provisions. That's critically important. Fighting cybercrime is something that I've been involved in this for like 20 years now. Others on this panel have had a lot of experience with it too. It's not new, but we need to work on that. We can cooperate internationally, but we need countries to adopt the legal framework they need. And here I'll draw a distinction with one of the comments that I've heard earlier today. I don't think we need a new global instrument for all of these different issues. When you talk about these global instruments, these are governmental instruments, and they're not really multi-stakeholder instruments. When you talk about trying to do a global cybercrime, a new global cybercrime instrument, you basically, that takes 5-10 years, and you end up with something that's not as strong as what we have now. So we really need, there's the urgency of now for countries to come together to cooperate and work together on some of these basic issues, but also to think about some of these larger issues. So with that, I'll stop, and I know we'll get to much more.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris. I liked your use of the word frenemies. You know the expression, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Where do frenemies fit in that? I'm not sure. I have to get a check on that. Let's see, two things. On the point about international regimes and kind of governance mechanisms, I think that everyone believes that the multi-stakeholder version or some way of saying that makes the point that it takes more than governments to make the internet work is right, but we are still struggling to find examples of that really work. So I think one of the things that we're certainly going to be doing in the months ahead is exploring that and trying to find some more models and create some more models of those multiplayer games. I've been told that, notwithstanding the time, we've been allotted our full 45 minutes here by the conference planners. So I asked that the staff let us know when we're about 7 minutes out from the end, so we can start to make sure there's room for your participation as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dirk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think I can help you on that one because I was encouraged to see that Chris' points are not too different from mine. So whilst I've been on the job only for a few weeks, it seems that I already got the right points on my list. But it also means that the list of issues which I could still raise at this time has been depleted a little bit by what I've heard before. But let me make 6 points, 3 where I just would like to underline some of the points which we have heard, and 3 points which are close to my heart and perhaps a bit more German, so to say, oriented. Some points which I would like to underline is the necessity for cooperation when it comes to cybersecurity. We have heard a lot about the certs. We have one too, and I think this is an important cooperation, can be done more. But I believe this is one of the backbones of cooperation on cybersecurity, and we believe we have a very well-functioning CERT too, as I've heard from our Chinese and Indian colleagues just a moment before. Let me also underline the importance of the Budapest Convention when it comes to cybercrime. We are also very much in support of enlarging the scope of the membership of this convention. As Chris just said, some countries use it and some have joined it. and we believe for the time being this is what we need, and this should be reinforced. And we don't need a new instrument here. We don't believe so. And that brings me to another point which I just wanted to also underline from my side, which is this work done in the framework of this group of governmental experts. We believe that is a very important job to be done. There's an effort right now to continue that work, and we believe that's very important. But I think the major theme here has been what Chris just said. We don't need a new complete set of international law. The group recommended to see it that way, that the international law does apply also to the cyberspace, and we believe that is important. We played a role in the first group, and we want to continue to do so in the next round as well. I will not go into confidence and security building measures because you have heard all about it, just to say that we are also staunch supporters of work on that front. Chris mentioned human rights, and I think human rights are important also in the context of the internet. Both our countries are also members of what we call the Freedom Online Coalition, so we are doing good work there. For us, Germans, the issue of human rights is closely linked to another issue which we call privacy, and recently we have made some initiatives on that account. When it comes to the Human Rights Commission in Geneva, we have had a side event at the end of September there, which tackled with this issue. We have done some work with our Brazilian colleagues in New York in the third committee, where we will introduce, after some further work, a resolution in the third committee on privacy. So privacy is a fundamental issue for us when it comes to the internet. And it has, as you can figure, it has gained in importance recently. Not identical, but closely linked to that issue is the issue of data. How you store data, how you protect data, etc. Again, another point which is very important for my country. Here we have to first have a very intense debate within the European Union. You know that the European Parliament passed some recommendations. The Council of Ministers takes a little longer to work this issue. There's some pressure that the work should be concluded soon. On the other hand, many would say quality before speed. So it's open right now. When that work would come to conclusion, there's a timing issue here because the Commission, and they are an important player in that field, mandate will be over next year because we will have elections to the European Parliament and a new Commission will start. But the whole issue of data and how you store and protect data is an important one. It also has a connection, as you know, with our friends here in the US, which is just the catchword, so to say, safe harbor one, and you have heard about the debate in the European Parliament on what is called SWIFT. The internet governance came up various times, and we have seen recently that there's quite some momentum in that debate. You have heard the Brazilian president coming out with a call for an initiative for a conference in Brazil next year. That has been closely worked up with others. I think it's fair to say that also the president of ICANN, or chief executive officer of ICANN, played a role in forming some of these momentum. And yeah, I think the genie is out of the box, and we now need to make sure that we make the best out of it and make sure that this debate is done in a kind of reasonable fashion and on the basis of the multi-stakeholder model. I think that is the most important point to say on that. So in this regard, we were encouraged that the Brazilian president made that very clear, I think, in a tweet after she issued the invitation. So the details need to be worked out. I think we are still in the early stages of that conference. Then you have to see, and I think we are doing that at another part of this conference. There are many other international events coming up too. And last point, perhaps, without details, there's also, as you can imagine, in Germany, in Europe, a debate on what some call technological sovereignty. It's actually catchwords like German mail or Eurocloud or whatever. You will hear very different notions here. Most of them are not 100% clear yet. There are diverging views on what exactly it could be or should be. Should it be done more national? Should it be done more within a European Union context? And where does this debate relate to another debate, which would be that we need to be careful when it comes to the free and global internet, meaning whether that debate perhaps may lead to a certain level of fragmentation, and what would that mean? So I think that is a whole other level of debate which is taking place in Europe as we speak. I think I will leave it with that. So at least I got 3 points on my list which I could save. Thank you.
Thank you, Dirk. I think it's really useful to underscore your last point there, given the recent revelations. There is a growing interest, which was already there before for a variety of reasons, both security reasons as well as privacy reasons and trade reasons, for this notion of technological sovereignty on a national level and the danger that poses to causing more fragmentation on the internet and reducing the economic benefits of the free flow of information and the efficiencies that come from that. All right, well, we've heard some governmental views, so we can now hear from, of course, there are many major cyber powers who are not governmental. We're pleased to have Scott with us here today to bring some of that context. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. So I think if you want to prepare for the future, it helps to think about the past and the present state. So if you go back to the earliest days of cybercrime and government response, it was all about two types of cooperation. It was public-private partnership based on the recognition that the vast majority of the internet was designed, deployed, and maintained by the private sector. And there was government-to-government cooperation as evidenced by groups like the G8 subgroup on high-tech crime and the Council of Europe Convention. And at that time, it was really a focus on everyone partnering together in the name of computer security, which has long been defined as protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data and systems. Of course, the world is not that simple. It turns out, and it's become increasingly clear, that governments have a very complex relationship with the internet that encompasses 4 discrete roles. So first of all, they're large enterprises, and so they worry about their computer security just like any large enterprise. Their customers are citizens, but basically they have lots of data, lots of systems, and they need to protect it. The second thing is that governments are protectors of the internet. They protect critical infrastructures, and they protect the privacy and security of internet users. And in that context, they're not just enterprises, they're regulators and policy wonks. But third, they're exploiters of the internet. And for quite some time, you've seen increasing activity, government-sponsored, whether it be economic espionage, nation-state espionage, or other kinds of activities that involve actually violating computer security. And then fourth, governments want access to data. They want it for law enforcement and national security purposes. They've always wanted access to data. Sometimes they get that access to data through conventional means of court orders where the methods are well documented and well understood. And sometimes they get that data by violating computer security and violating the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data and systems. And when the relationship between governments and the internet becomes that complex, 2 things become readily clear to me. First is, and we heard a little of it earlier, it is really important to scope where you want to cooperate and where you need to thrash out hard problems. Because there's so much rhetoric about government-to-government cooperation. At the same time, they may be attacking each other. And unless you're really clear about where you can cooperate, for example, everyone agrees that cybercrime that attacks citizens is bad, and governments and industry should cooperate to track cyber criminals. And then you have situations where governments are not going to agree to cooperate. because their interests are just completely inimical to one another. If you want a classic example of how that tension plays out in cooperation, think of the term attribution. We all talk about greater attribution on the internet. If we don't have attribution, we don't know who the actor is. So what do you hear from governments? Well, if it's cybercrime, let's cooperate, let's find attribution, let's find the source and arrest them. If it's military or economic espionage, oh, the internet doesn't allow for attribution. There's no way you can do anything about it. Do you believe in attribution or don't you? The answer is, it depends what you're investigating and whether we want attribution or we don't. And so that tension needs to be explicitly recognized and addressed. It also changes the way the public-private partnership has to work. As a large company with a global footprint, where more than half of our revenues come from outside the United States, we have to be fundamentally committed to three principles. One is a principle of security, which means we protect customers, we don't help people exploit them. We do not put back doors in products, and just think about it, it's economic suicide. You put a back door in your product, it's found, you can't sell anywhere in the world. And so we have to be committed to security, and people have to understand that when governments attack each other, it is one customer attacking another customer. The victim customer may ask for help, which they often do. The second thing is we have to be committed to privacy. And we have a large customer base of people who are concerned about privacy. As people who spend a lot of time in this space know, it really is a spectrum, a continuum. There are privacy fundamentalists who pay cash and don't have affinity cards and are, extremely concerned about their privacy. There are the privacy unconcerned at the other end of the spectrum. These are people who say, search my house, I have nothing to hide. But those extremes are actually minorities. Most people are privacy pragmatists. They believe that they should control what information is shared with whom for what purpose, and they want to make individualized decisions about privacy. I will give out my frequent flyer number to anyone who will give me miles because I like to upgrade. But when I go to a store and they ask for my phone number, I say, you don't need that and I don't want the call. I'm a pragmatist who leans a little to the fundamental side. But as a company, we have to be committed to protecting the privacy of our customers from all threats, including government threats. And then third, transparency. Companies and governments need to be more transparent about what they do in cyberspace. So we have transparency reports, as much of the industry does, on what kind of court orders we get. Where we haven't been allowed to reveal things, we've sued for that right. But governments also need to be more transparent about what they are doing in cyberspace. By transparency, I do not mean giving out specifics of classified operations. But what's becoming increasingly clear is that as all citizens rely on the internet for work, for play, for education, for all aspects of their lives, as the internet becomes so critical for everything we do in the way we live, the idea that there can be a lot of activity which sees no light of day, which implicates the security and privacy of people all over the world, is not sustainable. And so we're going to have to figure out, as an industry, as citizens, and as representatives of those citizens, that is governments, how we're going to have a more candid conversation about these activities. It's a very complicated and challenging issue. But I think if we don't address it, what ends up happening is you lose trust in the underlying infrastructure, and then you are afraid to live your life in the normal free way because there's too much opaqueness in the system. And so I think it is important, as EWI thinks about these issues, and as other experts around the world and governments think about this issue, that they be really crisp about what things they can resolve together in harmony because their strategic objectives are the same, like fighting crime, and what things create conflicts between the players, which need another methodology for resolution. I'll leave you with this short story. You know, I was with the American Bar Association, and they were doing this project on the national security implications of cyber attacks. And they were doing some scenario work, and they said, what happens if we were attacked by this country in this way? And I was the only industry representative. I said, what do you mean we? The country that you are alleging is attacking is a customer. I'm not on your side. I'm neutral. I don't think governments have quite gotten that yet.
Thank you very much, Scott. That's a great way to kind of start our little wrap up here. I've been given the high sign. So what I'd like the government panelists here to do is come down the line, if you would, and respond in particular to Scott's challenge about the need for increased transparency. Speaking as a civil society advocate here today, we certainly are, believe that transparency is a key technique to building trust. If you know what your frenemies are doing, it's really more helpful than if you don't know. So if I could ask Dirk, you to start and just come down the line here with a short comment on the need for more governmental transparency in this space.
Yeah, that is a difficult one for every government, so I don't deny that also in our country you always have had a debate between those who think we need more transparency or less transparency. You have also those in my country which would favor more storage of data, and you have others who would really object to that. So we have that debate. But I think you just used the word opaque. The system is opaque, and I think there really is a risk. If customers, let's call people the customers in your context right now, if customers use the trust in the system, then they will take different ways. And I indicated we are having a debate back home right now, which is about what I call technological sovereignty. And that is also because people want to be reassured that nobody can play around with their data. So these things do play a role, and I believe transparency is one issue here. Reassurance that the data is not being misused is another one. But I think if we talk about fragmentation as a risk, then we also need to address these risks, because otherwise I don't think it will add up.
So I think we need to disaggregate these various issues too. So there's a difference, for instance, between, intrusions that are stealing intellectual property, attacks on critical infrastructure, targeting of dissidents for speech or intelligence gathering. There's a wide range of different activities in cyberspace, and I think one of the problems I've seen is people just conflate all these things together without trying to break them apart. And frankly, there are different concerns and different policy aspects with respect to all of them. And on the issue of some of the attacks we've seen, the infrastructure and other attacks we've seen, I think part of this is for governments to think about, as ours is, and it's one of the things that we're undertaking now, is we talked about the GG and the applicability of international law at a high level, very high threshold level. You don't get to that high threshold level very often. There's a lot of activity below that threshold. And so what are the kind of peacetime norms? And that could go to whether attacking critical infrastructure, absent a shooting war, other kinds of things you can articulate. And that's something we're thinking about now and working with our lawyers, and something we're going to share with the international community, frankly. So I think we need to think about, disaggregate this issue and be very clear about what we're talking about here, and working with the other stakeholders in the community to make sure we are addressing each of those issues. And I think we are getting to that point. And that means transparency between governments, but also with other stakeholders. But I think some of those issues are underway now.
I didn't mean to suggest you're still a government representative, Latha, but you can think of it in that way.
Well, I'd like to say that in India, as you all know, we have a very robust democracy. People are not shy to voice their opinions. So there's been a real debate on this issue of privacy and transparency. But I would say that while it is a vociferous debate, at the same time, I think people have been sufficiently now made aware of the risks on attacks on critical information infrastructure or the use of cyberspace for terror, which they accept to a certain extent has to be countered by the government. So to use your own phrase, Scott, I think they are privacy pragmatists. I think there is a feeling that while they don't want their day-to-day privacy to be invaded, they do recognize that for certain critical security reasons, there may be need, to have a mechanism in place, but it should be very well implemented. There should be a proper legal procedure to be followed, and it shouldn't be random. It has to be transparent in that sense. But obviously, because these are very sensitive issues of security, I don't see it possible for governments to be totally transparent in terms of exactly what they're looking at. But there will be issues that they do have to look at. And I think that's as true for India as for any other country. Thank you.
Well, this is a great introduction to our next panel on privacy and security, which is about to come up. So a theme, we can see some themes here already. I want you to join me in applauding our great panelists here for their conversation. And thanks very much.